Does the Israeli government really believe the United Nations Secretary General is encouraging terrorism? I'll ask the country's de facto and controversial foreign minister. I'm Mehdi Hasan, also on the show. Another round of Syrian peace talks, another failure. So what are the options, if any, for ending the violence in that country? I'll ask the former Syrian diplomat who secretly smuggled dissidents out of his country before defecting to the opposition. But first, the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon says resisting occupation is just human nature, and it's the occupation of the West Bank that leads to extremism. The Israeli government says he's encouraging terrorism. But is the country now increasingly isolated abroad on the issue of occupation? This week's headliner from Tel Aviv, Israel's most senior diplomat, Deputy Foreign Minister Tzipi Hotovely. Tzipi Hotovely, welcome to UpFront. I want to begin by playing you a clip from UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's recent address to the UN Security Council, in which he refers to the consequences of, quote, Palestinian frustration and the failure of the peace process.
As oppressed peoples have demonstrated throughout the ages, it is a human nature to react to occupation, which often serves as a potent incubator of hate and extremism.
Will your government be apologizing to Ban Ki-moon? He says you've twisted his words. He didn't justify any violence, yet you accused him of encouraging terrorism, of leading a tailwind of terror. Pretty outrageous claims to make about the UN Secretary General for stating the obvious. Everyone at the UN believes there's an occupation. I know you don't. But to call him an apologist for terrorism is pretty outrageous, isn't it?
I'm saying that everyone who gives justification to any terror acts is, even if he's doing it in, I would say, an innocent way, this is not the proper way to deal with the fact that for the last 6 months we've been suffering on a daily basis from the Palestinians' terror attacks, brutal terror attacks. Some of them are harming young women. Just 2 weeks ago, a young mother was brutally murdered by a Palestinian youngster that killed her in front of her children. This is the reality in Israel. So you need to, first of all, to condemn terrorism and to tell the Palestinians to stop using knives on a daily basis against Israeli citizens. When you start from that, it's a great way to start, not justify terror, just like you don't justify ISIS when they commit terror attacks in Paris.
Ban Ki-moon, of course, did condemn terrorism in his speech and in his New York Times article. Here's the thing, how can you criticize Ban Ki-moon for saying what he said when a whole host of current and former Israeli security chiefs, Israeli intelligence officials, they've all said similar things? Your Shin Bet domestic security agency said last November that Palestinians are carrying out attacks to, quote, escape from a bleak reality which they perceive as unchangeable. The head of Israeli military intelligence told you and your cabinet colleagues last November that Palestinians have carried out attacks because they, quote, felt they had nothing to lose. Are they apologists of terrorism as well?
Let me tell you something. What's nice about democratic systems, and I'm very proud of Israel's democracy, you have many different opinions, and what you quoted is just one side of the picture. Of course, there are many other people that are saying that the Palestinian society today is choosing to the extremist sides under the influence of ISIS as the atmosphere of the way the youngsters are being raised, and unfortunately also when they are raised under the very hard incitement of the Palestinian Authority.
Just to be clear, is the head of Israeli military intelligence, is the Shin Bet Israeli security agency, are they apologizing or justifying terrorism when they say Palestinians are full of despair and hopeless and that's why they're carrying out attacks? Are they apologists for terrorism as well? Yes or no?
You're quoting, I would say, one opinion from a spectrum of opinions.
And is that opinion wrong?
Let me tell you something. I'm a politician. I'm leading policy. This is my responsibility to lead my people to the best future they can have.
You're a politician. You're avoiding a very simple question. Is the head of Israeli military intelligence wrong?
This analysis is absolutely wrong, and I can tell you why. Because at the moment, one thing is very certain when you look back at history. The Oslo Accords were the time where Palestinians had the best hope to have their own state. Did it make them stop terrorism? No. I grew up as a young student in Tel Aviv. Buses used to blow up from shaheeds, from terrorist attacks in Tel Aviv, in the middle of Tel Aviv, in the middle of Jerusalem. It means that terrorism is the main problem, is the main issue, not frustration.
The Palestinians, of course, would say that the death toll on their side amongst civilians has been much higher since Oslo. But let's not argue about those. We've argued about that many times on this show. You keep saying Palestinian incitement is what's driving the violence. And yet a lot of that incitement, according to your Prime Minister and others, is to do with, quote, false rumours about Israel wanting to change the status quo at the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, also referred to as the Temple Mount. But here's the thing. Regardless of what your government says, you do want to change the status quo, don't you? You've said, and I quote, "My dream is to see the Israeli flag flying over the Temple Mount," a provocative comment which led to your boss, the Prime Minister, telling you off publicly, didn't he?
Okay, my personal statement is very clear. I'm part of a government that remains the status quo. The Israeli flag is a symbol to the fact that Israel is a sovereign in Jerusalem. It's very simple. Now, let me remind you something. The only state in the world that allows free access to all religions on Temple Mountain is Israel. So under Israeli regime, all religions in the world can have free access to Temple Mountain. That's the way we want it to be. That's the way we want to keep it. And this is why my Prime Minister keeps on saying that the status quo will remain. We even encourage the idea of cameras on the mountain so you can see very clearly who's the provocations, who are the people who are creating provocations on the mountain.
Minister, your Prime Minister has blamed the Palestinians for the Holocaust. Your former Foreign Minister threatened to behead disloyal Palestinian citizens of Israel. Your Justice Minister shared a Facebook post referring to Palestinian children as little snakes, and your Deputy Defence Minister has compared Palestinians to animals. Some might say, how is that not incitement? How is that not hate speech from the Israeli side against Palestinians?
I must say that some of the examples you just gave are baseless. And the most important thing to remember is that whenever there is incorrect statement from the Israeli side, you can hear in the most sincere way a correction. But when you hear for the last, I would say over 20 years, incitement that is basically subsidizing families of shaheeds and giving them money from the Palestinian Authority budget, supporting them, naming schools, naming streets after those terrorists, you see those phenomena in the Palestinian street, you need to condemn that. And in Israel, every time there is any kind of terror attack, coming from whoever side, we are condemning it, and we're saying that we are going to fight terrorism no matter who's committing it. From the Palestinian side, you see praising terrorists, you see supporting terrorism, and you see, I would say, the most evil way to actually encourage the youngsters and poisoning their minds by having television shows that are being sponsored by the Palestinian Authority that are teaching them how to kill Jews.
I think we'd agree that hate speech is unacceptable from whichever side it comes from. But just this week, Israeli forces demolished 23 houses in 2 of the occupied West Bank's poorest villages, making more than 100 Palestinians homeless in the West Bank, including dozens of children in the middle of winter. Do you think one of those Palestinian children growing up who's just lost his house, do you think he needs any incitement to hate Israel and the occupation? Aren't you providing him with incitement enough?
You need to think why those houses are being destroyed. The only houses we destroy are the houses of terrorists.
No, these weren't terrorists.
This is something
these people weren't terrorists, actually. They were in a closed military zone.
And you're trying to stop
Minister, these people were not terrorists.
The atmosphere.
110 people, including children, were all terrorists in a closed military zone in the West Bank.
Mehdi, we're not destroying any house without legal basis. We are a democracy that keeps all the laws to both sides. And I must tell you something. My children are being raised on the idea of peace and coexistence. I don't see the same in the Palestinian educational system. I would like to see more people in the Palestinian Authority calling to having change, a dramatic change in the way those children are being educated. I think that every Jewish mother is saying to her child when he's born, I hope you won't have to go to any war because we'll have peace in the future.
You say that you're raising your children.
I don't see Palestinian mothers that are saying the same thing.
Maybe because they're looking for somewhere to live.
Israel is not destroying houses without legal basis.
That's not what the Israeli group Peace Now said this week. When you were appointed, you say that you're raising your children to teach them hope and coexistence and peace. When you were appointed to effectively be Israel's most senior diplomat last May, you gave a speech in which you said, in reference to the occupied West Bank, "This land is ours. All of it is ours." And you justified that statement with reference to the Torah and with God's promise to the Jews. When some Muslims try and impose their laws, their beliefs on others with reference to the Quran, they're often called Islamic extremists. Are you surprised then when some say you sound like a Jewish extremist using the Bible as some sort of property deed to dispossess others?
Well, the most important thing is to remember your history and to remember the deep ties that the Jewish nation has to our land, to the land of Israel. But the big difference is when they're saying that this is Islamic land, they mean that I don't have the right to live here as an equal citizen. We have 20% of Arabs, equal citizens,
you're saying that about them.
being part of the diplomatic people in Israel, being part of our Supreme Court, being part of our parliament, Do you see the same in the Palestinian Authority when they actually want to have ethnical claims? They don't want to have even one single Jew in Judea and Samaria. Do you hear the difference?
Do you stand by the quote, all of the land is ours?
I'm asking you again, do you hear the difference?
I'm not the one being interviewed,
We are a democratic state that are allowing
by the
to
quote that
whoever
all of
wants
the land is ours?
The fact that this land is the land of the Jewish people, the fact that we have historic roots in Jerusalem, in Bethel, in Hebron, in Shechem, doesn't mean that I don't allow another people to live there together with me.
So you support a Palestinian state?
That's the difference between our approach and the Islamic approach. The Islamic approach denies my right to exist as a Jewish state.
Do you support a Palestinian state?
Well, ISIS denies the right to French to live in Paris peacefully.
Do you support a Palestinian state?
This is where the radical Islam is leading us to. We need to fight all extremists from all sides.
Agreed.
And I'm saying again,
do you support
my
a
Prime
Palestinian
Minister,
state?
as part of the last 6 governments of Israel, said that he's going to the two-state solution.
I didn't ask about
Wait
your Prime
a second.
Minister.
You're not
do you
listening
support
to
a
me.
Palestinian
Mehdi,
state?
you need to listen to me.
Please
I'm
answer
saying
the question.
with very clear
Fifth
voice.
time.
For
do you
the
support
last
a Palestinian state?
If you don't want to listen, then this is not a polite thing to do. I'm representing a government that is declaring in a very clear way on a policy of a two-state solution, and you know that nothing is helping Abu Mazen to come to Jerusalem, to anywhere else in the world, in order to negotiate. No solution, no declaration, no speech will lead Abu Mazen to come and sit to negotiate with us. This is the thing that is actually preventing the solution between Israelis and Palestinians. That's the main story.
Minister, do you support a Palestinian state?
You're not listening.
I am listening. I've been waiting patiently.
You're not listening.
I've been waiting patiently.
This is
do you
the
support a
policy of my
Palestinian
government,
state?
as I said before.
Do you, the foreign minister, does Tzipi Hotovely support a Palestinian state?
Mehdi, you're not. Mehdi, it's so simple.
It is simple. Do you support a Palestinian state?
I'm answering in the very clear voice. I'm representing the policy of my government.
And what about you?
Very simple.
What about you? Do you support a Palestinian state?
You can ask that 10 times again, and I'm going to answer you again. I'm representing the policy of my Prime Minister. If you don't want to listen to me and to actually to touch the main point.
Okay, fine.
Do you think the Palestinians are recognizing my right to exist as a Jewish state?
Okay, let me ask you this. Okay, let's move on.
I answered you already. If you don't want to get my answer, it's your problem.
Let's move on. If you are the most senior member of the Israeli Foreign Ministry, you said that your job as Foreign Minister last year was to get international recognition for Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank, which are regarded as illegal settlements by the UN. Let's just assume that the UN agrees with you that those settlements are legal, that you can control the West Bank forever. What happens to the people there? Will you give them the vote to write?
20% of Arabs in Israel.
Will you give the will you give the Palestinians in the West Bank the right to vote? And if not, won't that make you an apartheid state, as Ehud Olmert, John Kerry, and many others have warned you're becoming if you don't give those people either a state or a right to vote? What do you do with the Palestinians in the West Bank?
Let me tell you something. The most important thing that I expect from any international leader to do is to call the two sides to sit in one room and to negotiate. And the second thing I expect every international leader to do is to call the Palestinians to stop violence, stop terrorism.
Okay, but
now, this is the base of any infrastructure you can imagine.
What's the answer to my question? What do you want to see happen to the Palestinians in the West Bank?
Very simple. I want to see the Palestinians becoming my neighbors and not my enemies. And right now they're choosing to be my enemies and not my neighbors.
So do they get to right to vote?
I live peacefully with Egypt. It depends what the path they're going to choose. If they're choosing a war, the way it is at the moment, it seems like the violence they're putting against our own people is something that we need to fight. We need to fight through incitement. We need to fight through daily basis terrorism. We need to live, first of all, the near future. And in the near future, we need to fight terrorism no matter where it's coming from. And you're asking me about future infrastructure. Well, look at the Middle East. The Middle East is falling apart. You see countries don't exist anymore. So we need to be very sure and clear that the Palestinian Authority can control the messaging and can control the youngsters when it comes to the vision of the coming future. That's the most important thing.
Tzipi Hotovely, thanks so much for joining me on UpFront. Poor old Barack Obama. He's in the last year of his presidency, yet now more than ever, his opponents basically think he's a wimp, a coward, too weak, too soft, not tough enough when it comes to national security.
The problem here is that it's been a weak response by Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton for the last 7 years.
Because they know Barack Obama's weak.
The American people understand that President Obama is weak.
What are these guys smoking? Obama's foreign policy six-pack needs no bulking up. This is a guy who turned up at his Nobel Peace Prize award ceremony to talk about the importance of war. But let's look at 3 specific ways in which Obama has been more hawk than dove, more tough than soft. Drones. Dovish Obama has launched more than 10 times as many drone strikes as George W. Bush did. Yeah, Bush, the most hawkish Republican president in living memory. Unlike W, Barack even targeted a US citizen with a drone strike and shamefully killed his 16-year-old US son as well. Navy SEALs. We can't forget the action movie that was the middle-of-the-night US Special Forces mission to hunt down the world's most wanted man, Osama bin Laden. Bush had said he wanted bin Laden dead or alive, but didn't get him dead or alive. It was the wimpish Obama who took a massive gamble by sending in SEAL Team 6 to take out the al-Qaeda leader in his Pakistani compound.
Ask Osama bin Laden whether I engage in appeasement.
You have to admit, whether you agree with the decision to kill OBL or not, that was pretty Rambo of him. Finally, regime change. Obama's the guy who bombed Libya in 2011, helping to topple and kill Colonel Gaddafi. The mad dog dictator who tormented Presidents Reagan, Clinton, and both Bushes. What a weakling! Look, I just don't get it with this whole Obama's a wimp thing. Many of you may not be fans of his more aggressive policies. Me neither. But the Republicans surely should be embracing tough guy Barack on national security. This is a guy who has dropped bombs on seven different Muslim-majority countries in the space of 7 years. If you're a Republican hawk, what's not to like about that? The UN-Syria peace talks have been suspended again. So what went wrong this time? I'm joined by Bassam Barabandi, who was a career diplomat serving in the Syrian government's embassy in Washington, D.C. But he was a mole, secretly issuing passports to Syrian opposition activists battling the Assad regime. In 2013, he formally defected and is now part of the official Syrian opposition and a political advisor to the head of the High Negotiations Committee, which left the Geneva talks this week and threatened not to return. Bassam Barabandi, thanks for joining me on UpFront. Is this just a temporary pause to the peace talks, as the UN Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura said on Wednesday, or are they done? Are they finished, in your view?
We hope it's not. The opposition is very clear concerning the peace talks, that we believe that political solution is the way to solve the Syrian crisis. And we hope the UN and the superpowers use influence and leverage on the regime side in order to give the people hope.
You say it's up to the superpowers to have leverage. Some would say that rather than you guys, the opposition, and Assad sitting around the table, really it's all of the external powers, all of the regional powers and superpowers who are involved in the various sides who should be getting around the table. Some say that Saudi and Iran need to get to an agreement first before Syria can be saved.
I agree. I mean, if the Saudis and the Iranians, they find a way to sit together to solve all the problems, a lot of things will change positively in the Middle East. But it's about Iran. Iran is refusing to act in a productive way, in peaceful way, in respecting the neighbors, respecting the sovereignty of the people, you know.
And the Iranians say it's the backers of the Syrian opposition who fund quote-unquote jihadist groups,
yeah, I mean, just today,
the
Iranian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Zarifi, he said that Iran is supporting the ceasefire in Syria. And that's, for us, it's ridiculous simply because Iran is fighting, Iran is killing. So if he is ready, is he serious when he's talking? He just ordered his people to stop the killing.
The Syrian army, backed by Iran, backed by Russian airstrikes, which the Russians say are targeted at ISIL and at Jabhat al-Nusra, the Syrian army is on the up at the moment. It's busy retaking rebel-held territory on the ground this week. Some would say now's a good time for you guys to talk to them. You know, you're losing a lot of leverage right now.
Again, at the UN, in the meeting in Geneva, that some people, they raised the question of ceasefire for ceasefire. And we told them that ceasefire, the people already, we lost more than 400,000 people has been killed. More, God knows how many numbers has been disappeared. You know the number of the refugees. So any solution should consider the root of the problems, not the consequences of the problems.
But again, many would say you need to be realistic. You know, 5 years ago, the Syrian opposition and the US government stuck to this line that Assad has to go. He can't be part of any solution. It's non-negotiable. Today, the US government, recognizing facts on the ground, recognizing that just demanding something doesn't make it happen, it's switched now. It's softened its position on Assad and his future role in any peace talks or transition. Isn't it time, many would say, the Syrian opposition did the same in relation to Assad? Just accept the reality. As much as you loathe him, rightly or wrongly, we are where we are.
As long as Assad in power, there will be no stability. There will be more refugees, there will be more terrorist group, there will be more ISIS expanding.
And your opponents would say, as long as you refuse to sit down and talk and accept some part of the regime, the war will carry on and more people will die.
We say that we are willing to accept the regime, the people who didn't kill the people who have no blood in their hands. We want stability in Syria, stability in the Middle East. We want the people, refugees, to come back their home. So we are with the negotiation. We are with the peaceful negotiation that will not produce Assad regime again.
The problem with saying you want the killings to stop first before we get anywhere, the problem with saying you want people without blood on their hands involved is that...
On both sides.
Both sides.
This
is the problem.
No, there's no
This
problem.
is what a lot of people point out. You know,
No,
the
there's no
Syrian
problem.
opposition, Syrian rebel groups have been accused of vicious war crimes and human rights violations. Not on the scale of the Assad regime, but still torture, killings, kidnappings, starvation. We heard a lot about the Assad siege of Madaya, disgusting siege of Madaya, which the UN Secretary General called a war crime. But he also accused Syrian rebel groups of using starvation against 2 regime-controlled towns. How do we move forward when all sides have blood on their hands?
No, we say that the future of Syria should be without the people who have blood on their hands. The future of Syria.
Okay.
But today, I mean, we have to sit with so many people that they have blood on their hands because we have to go forward.
So as an advisor to the High Negotiations Committee head, would you say that in a future Syria, tell me what your future Syria looks like without Assad after the war is over? Does it involve some of these quote-unquote Islamist groups, jihadist groups on the rebel side? Are they part of the coalition government that rules in Syria?
As long as they are Syrian fighters, freedom fighters, they have nothing, they don't associate it with Al-Qaeda, with any terrorist group, they are Syrian.
What if they don't believe in democracy? What if they want a khilafat?
We don't believe that whenever we have stability in Syria, that this mode or this trend of the extreme Islamists will exist in Syria.
Isn't that what everyone said in Libya? And today, look at Libya today.
It's about how
militias are at each other's throats.
It's about how to reach there. It's about the process. If you give us the stability, you give us political process, you give us the leverage for all the parties, I think we will have way to go ahead.
Even though some groups on your side don't believe in elections or democracy,
they are minorities. Maybe they are because of the due to the war nowadays. They have upper hand a little bit. But when you talk about,
but you're confident they wouldn't have an upper hand in the future.
As long as if we have stability, I don't think. As long as we have stability, the people have the right to choose.
That's what's lacking at the moment. Yep. You personally, Bassam, in an almost Hollywood movie way, you worked as a mole for the Syrian opposition within the Syrian embassy in Washington, D.C., before rather dramatically defecting in July 2013. Did you think then that 2.5 years later, this war would still be raging on and would be no closer to a negotiated solution?
Look, I work with the Syrian Foreign Ministry for the last 15, 17 years. And I had the chance to be in good position, and I knew from day one that we are going to bloody war. I didn't expect that to be that long or that bloody. So I chose to help the people the position where I am to reach to the point that I knew that is done. The regime knows about me.
When you were helping the people from within the embassy working for the Assad regime, were you worried about getting caught and what might happen to you if you got caught?
No, it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy at all. So many people were against me. I know some people from the embassy themselves, they work with the Assad regime as whatever they are. Like intelligence against us. So the risk was very high, extremely was high. But for me, still, I was not in Syria. The damage will be in a way controlled. They confiscated my houses, the family houses, such kind of thing. But when you compare it to the person who lost his family, it's nothing. So I had a mobilization to help the people.
You said you worked for the Syrian Foreign Ministry for more than a decade.
Yeah.
You obviously must still have contacts in there, people you worked with. Sure. You must know how they think. Do you think that there are people within that ministry, within that government, who will either A, compromise, or B, join you and turn against Assad?
Look, I think from my experience from most of this category that you are talking about, even with the Alawite, even with the people close to Assad himself, I don't think the people are happy with the war. Everybody wants this war to be finished. Of course. Number one. Number two, everybody wants to have some kind of guarantee that after this war, after all these damages, I will not be affected as long as I have nothing to do with the war as technocrats. And I think with this new committee in HC, I think they are providing such kind of guarantees.
Hasan Baramandi, thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much for having time for having me.
That's our show. Up Front will be back next week.